Stop.
Welcome to Quit Bleeping Around, a podcast dedicated to helping you achieve more in life. Here's your host, Christina Eanes.
Hey, super achievers. Today I'm interviewing Lynda Katz Wilner. Lynda is a corporate communication specialist and Maryland licensed speech and language pathologist. She provides professional speaking skills training for individuals and groups. Welcome, Lynda. Thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure to be here, Christina.
Well, we had a great conversation at the Influence the National Speakers Convention recently, and to find out that we live near each other. So, could you share some information about your background so our listeners can learn more about you?
Sure. Basically, right now, you said we live near each other. I'm from the Baltimore, Washington area, as you are. But I have not always been here. I've lived in other cities and other states, which is very important when we start talking about what I actually do. But I started my career as a speech and language pathologist. So I worked in healthcare. I worked with adults and some children who had speech, language, voice, and all types of communication problems. So I did speech therapy with people and worked with that aspect of communication. But as you know, that's evolved over the years and has changed into other directions.
Oh, immensely. You do a lot of stuff with professional presence. Can you share some tips perhaps for the listeners?
Sure. I help people polish or master their professional presence. And what I mean by that is we all know the people who may say all the right things and they have this wonderful voice, but they show up and they don't look the part. And so what I do is I look at communication as three V's of communication. The visual, how they look, not just their dress, but how they carry themselves and their nonverbal or visual communication. I look at the verbal, what they say, and most importantly, and what's so important as a speech and language pathologist, is how they say it with their voice, either their pronunciation, their rate of speech. Do they speak monotone? Are they too perky? What do they do? What is the quality of their voice like? And so I help people balance the three V's so that they're consistent with each other and it makes them more credible to the listener.
Ooh, so for the listener, speaking of, how can they balance this?
How can they balance this as far as the three V's, the visual?
Yes.
Well, okay. Well, when I work with somebody, I'll see them and we often video them when they're talking. And we're looking, it's very easy. As many people know, you could even read books on it. Just what do you need to do with your body language? So the focus that I have with them is number one, how is your posture? Do you carry yourself in a professional manner? And so it's not just dress, it's your posture. How do you use your hands? Some people stand there and they hug their body or hold their arm or wring their hands and they just don't know what to do with it. And that often will exude nervousness. And I'm sure you've seen that a lot in your career when you're reading people's body language. So I
Yes.
look, I look at the visual, I look at the eye contact. The person who's looking away all the time, if they're of the American culture, is not showing the signs that we need to engage. I said the American culture because other cultures may look away as a sign of respect, and we have to understand those differences. So that's the visual, a big part of the visual. When I look at the vocal, that has so many features. As I mentioned, I can look at their pronunciation and evaluate how well are they pronouncing consonants and vowels, and that becomes important if somebody has a regional dialect or if they have a foreign accent because those vowels may be very different. I also look at the rhythm and tone of their speech. If I'm talking, and this is even for anybody, if you're talking and your voice goes up a lot when you make statements and you're trying to sound convincing, but your voice is going up like I'm doing, you don't sound as experienced, you don't sound as mature, you don't sound as confident. And
Yeah.
so I help people have the presence and the confidence so when they say something, they have that authority in their voice. That's probably one of the biggest areas that I can address with people. And of course, there's the rate of speech. How do you get somebody to slow down? You- Do you ask them to? No, we don't do that. But we work on phrasing the information and pausing more. And that brings me to the probably one of the biggest problems for people is the use of those ums, the uhs, the you knows, the likes. And how do we do that? We do not count them. I may count them just to see where that person starts, but we don't think about the ums, the ahs, and the you knows. We replace that with thinking about pausing. And when we
Hmm.
pause, we don't have to fill the space, although most of us feel we need to. But when we pause, we sound more confident and we give the listener more time to absorb what we're saying. So if you think of the better speakers that you've seen, they know how to use pausing. And the nervous speakers never pause. So
Right.
those are some of the vocal, and there are many more, but those are some of the key vocal areas that I listen to when I work with somebody, and then we work on changing it. Just today, I worked with somebody who had a monotone and learning how to just change the pitch when they're saying the stressed word. So instead of saying, I'll see you at 4, where I just made it louder, I say, I'll see you at 4. And it's a more pleasant tone, but you have variety in the way that you're speaking.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
We don't think of all those things, do we?
Exactly.
And Christine, it's simply watching. I video record my clients, and when they watch themselves, that speaks volumes because they can
Oh,
see their body language, they hear their voice, or they become concerned about some of those aspects. And of course, then we listen to their message. That's another whole story. Like, what about those people who ramble and never get to the point? So I
ooh,
can help them with that too.
nice. Now, before you get to voice, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask about the dreaded so.
Yes.
Any tips for that?
Oh, I'm glad you said that because I think that's the new I think
Yep.
that wherever I go, and I was just involved in something on LinkedIn where we were talking about this, many people and professionals, when they're asked to speak, and again, we hear lots of, you and I hear lots of very polished speakers. And very often I'll hear, even with some polished speakers, their first response is, so. And and they're using it as a transition. But a transition
Yeah,
to what? Their message will be so much more powerful if they just start with their message. When
exactly.
people have PowerPoints and presentations, and I'm guilty of this too. I know I've done this. As you move to the next slide, so it's like we feel like we need to keep talking. And if we paused, and at that moment people looked up at us, and then we transition to the next bit of information, it's so much more powerful than filling all that space with our so's. Our message just, it sounds more casual. And again, some of these patterns I talk about, for some people, they may choose to do it because of the audience they're speaking to. So we do change our style of speaking depending on how formal the situation might be and who the audience is.
Nice. Yeah. The so is I'm guilty sometimes of
Mhm.
that.
And
Yeah.
when you think about it, Christina, when you think about what you don't want to do, and I'm sure you know this, it becomes what you do, right?
Exactly.
If you play sports and you say, I better not hit that golf ball in the water, of course it goes in the water because it's entered into our consciousness at that point.
Yep.
So we have to be
Or if
very
you're
careful.
yeah, or if you're speaking with someone, sometimes I will take on, especially during an interview, if someone's saying a lot, I'm
Mhm.
trying not to think of saying it and I end up saying it. So,
And there's something to be said for mirroring somebody's pattern, right?
right.
If you do that, you align better with them, but you certainly don't want to lower the bar too low so that you're not sounding professional. But we often do pick up patterns because we see that person speaking that way. And if we do it, we connect better with that person.
Yeah, that's a good point. I like that. I'm connecting better with them.
Right. It's nothing wrong with what you're doing. You're doing it intentionally.
That's it. I'll go with that one.
Sure.
So, what about the voice?
The voice. Oh boy. A lot of people will say, well, that's just how I speak. And I can't change it. And you can change it. Now, we're not always talking about changing the pitch and all these other aspects, but a common thing many of us do, and many women do this even more, is speaking down at the bottom of our pitch range, where
Yeah.
we lose energy with that. And that's simply something you can change by having better support to your voice and better breath. Now, some people have it as the tired voice at the ends of their sentences. And other people, I hate to say young females, but that has been the target of this, use this fry quality because they've heard it in Hollywood. And so speaking like this has become
Ow.
fashionable. And I have no idea why it's fashionable, but you'll hear many women doing this. Interestingly enough, when men do this, they don't get the same negative reaction. And in some countries, like in England and in Australia, that vocal fry, that quality is completely acceptable.
Huh.
Also in the ears of the beholder, right? It depends what you're hearing
Oh, I like that.
and whether or not it's appealing. But I tell a lot of my clients that you want to have patterns that are acceptable to all generations. And the millennial generation is accepting a lot of these patterns. But if the boss is not in that generation, it might behoove you to modify your vocal style so you come across in a polished way to all of your audience, not just your peers.
Right. I love that. Any tips for those with accents?
Yes, yes. I've written many books on accents, mostly on foreign accents, but we even wrote a book, my colleague and I, on the Boston accent. So, a moment of disclosure, I am a native New Yorker who very early when I was in college, I went to school in Maryland and people teased me about my New York accent. And it made me very aware that just by the way a person speaks is a stereotype. And people stop listening to what you're saying if they're distracted by the way you're saying it.
Yeah.
So they love to hear me say chocolate and coffee in Long Island, right? And, and I said, if you're focusing on that, you're not listening to what I say. And so regional dialects, or we call them accents, are something that don't have to be changed because we love the diversity that we have all around the United States and all around the world. But when it becomes a distraction, that's the time where somebody might want to make some changes. And that's what I felt because I wasn't in the New York area anymore. So when I was in other states, I felt like my accent was a distraction. So I would try to neutralize it, not necessarily eliminate it, so that it didn't become the whole topic of conversation. And so, what is an accent? If we're talking about the regional dialects around the United States, it could be how we say our vowels. So, like coffee is different from coffee, right? Or home,
Uh-huh.
home is different from home. And
Huh.
so the vowels are often different around the country. With regional dialects, our consonants aren't that different, other than some people dropping the ng and walking and talking instead of walking and talking.
Uh-huh. Or
So those,
gonna.
and reducing words like
One
gonna,
of my favorite.
right? Or vocabulary. Certain words are part, like you hear about the word pop, meaning soda in some places. People have different words for certain terminology, and that's
Right.
we see that all around the United States. And there's nothing wrong with that unless your audience doesn't understand you. So my recommendation is be just aware of who your audience is. And if your pattern is a distraction to them, then you can modify it. When it comes to foreign accents, it's a bigger issue because the people I work with are brilliant and multilingual and have good command of English. But because of some of those consonants and the rhythm patterns, the listeners are having trouble understanding them. And if they're a doctor giving information, that's a problem.
Ooh.
If they're on customer support on a telephone or IT, and we're calling in and trying to get information, that's a problem. So, for certain professions, having a heavy accent that's not understandable can interfere with with what they're trying to accomplish in their work. And so in those cases, I have some tips that my colleague and I have developed, some strategies on how to say certain things as simply as your name. So
Huh.
you probably never thought of it, Christina, but when we say our first and last name, if I say just Lynda Wilner, can you hear how I'm stressing my last name? If I said to you, "Hi, my name is Lynda Wilner," you wouldn't understand me as well. And
Yeah.
so just by changing the stress pattern, it helps us communicate. The same thing with saying 50. If I say 50 or 15, it's different. And if we're talking about medication or talking about $15 million, you better know and say it correctly so there's no mistake.
Right.
And so accents have those rhythm changes that make it difficult. If I said to you that he's the CEO of the company, I didn't stress it correctly. It should be he's the CEO. And those little tweaks that we can make with people who have foreign accents can help them immeasurably improve their communication in a very practical manner.
Wow. Yeah, I like that. And I also just even as a regular speaker, non-foreign accent
Mhm.
here in the US, I find I need to stay away from certain words just because I cannot pronounce them.
Hmm. Okay. So
So finding different words maybe that also is that another strategy?
people might do that or they avoid that. The challenge is the mental gymnastics that go on to think of something while you're talking. But
Oh,
of
that's
course,
true.
if it's challenging, I mean, people who actually stutter, who have stuttering problems, often are substituting words because they know that word will give them a problem. They tend to have very large vocabularies because of that. But
Oh,
it
wow.
takes a lot of mental energy to start substituting what you're saying, and your message doesn't always come out exactly how you want it.
Oh, true. Yeah.
So sometimes it is practice certain words that are, if they're keywords in your industry, you want to be able to pronounce those words.
Yeah, I had trouble with because law enforcement, right?
Mm.
So I'd always sound like Elmer Fudd when I was saying corroborate. So I would just say, if it's the evidence matches.
Interesting. Right. So if you know you're really having trouble, sure.
Unless I wanted the audience to be laughing, then
Right. I mean, we know we have to know our limitations. That's a good thing.
yes.
And it's interesting that you say that because I was giving a keynote someplace and I was talking about their organization. And because I'm a reformed New Yorker,
Uh-huh.
I would normally say organization. I wouldn't put the
Yeah.
R in there. And every time I reviewed what I was going to say, I found myself tripping over the word organization. But I needed to,
Uh-huh.
and when I listen back, because it was recorded, I hear a little bit of that New York accent because those
Uh-huh.
the R's drop off. And the same thing. And sometimes you add them. So law would be law,
Yep.
right? Law enforcement sounds like a New Yorker talking.
Yep. Oh.
We have to have a sense of humor, right? I mean, I think
That's
that's the
it.
biggest
Right.
part.
So overall, we do our best, right? We try to
Absolutely.
fix those areas that are getting in our way, but also appreciate the differences, right?
Right. And we're not perfect.
Exactly.
That's a tough
Now,
one, but we have to embrace that.
I know we're human. So now, before we get to the focus on you as a super achiever, can you share if someone's interested in your services or what kind of resources or services that you provide?
Sure. I do work on one on one. I work with individuals who are looking to polish their professional presence or work on their public speaking skills. Sometimes they may have a speech that they want to work on and they come to me and we video and work on that. I conduct master classes where I meet with small groups of no more than 8 people, where we get together for 2 hours and work, video, give each other feedback, and that's wonderful. People love that because you walk away after 2 hours having a good handle on which V's you need to work on. Uh, and I speak to organizations on these topics. I talk about communication skills. I also work with listening skills, and again, accents when there's an organization that has a lot of people who are international. So those are the different areas. I do have a website, so certainly people can go to my website at successfully-speaking.com. And I do have a lot of training materials that I've developed with my colleague. We have actually 11 products, one being video lessons. I have modules of mastering your professional presence, and all of that can be found on my website. Most of all, I do offer free 15-minute telephone call consultations if people do have questions and want to explore the services that I have.
Nice. Yeah, I have seen you have a lot of complimentary resources on your website. So
Hmm.
thank you.
Sure.
Yeah. So now, as a super achiever, what is the biggest challenge that you find that you face on a regular basis?
As a super achiever, what drives me, what feeds me is helping people. And that's why I went into the field of speech pathology because I wanted to help people. And I'm still doing it. So I think as a super achiever, I want to help all my clients be as good as they can possibly be. And so I give, of course, more than 100%. And that's a challenge. You have to know your limitations, but I think that's what makes me the super achiever to help people, and hopefully not the overachiever because I'm not competing to do it better than anybody else. I'm trying to do it best for the person who's on the receiving end of it.
Nice. Yeah, helping others is an awesome super achiever trait to have.
Right, but and
Now,
remembering about yourself too.
yes.
To preserve yourself.
Yeah, don't forget that part. That's
Right,
important too. We don't want it
right,
to go into the overachieving, like you said.
right.
Now, is there anything that you don't spend your time and energy on so that you can focus on your life's mission?
That I don't. I try not, and this is the challenge I face, I'm sure many other people face. I try not to get caught up in the minutia or the things that I can't change because you can worry a lot about that. And if you can't change it, it's not going to be productive.
Right.
I'd rather focus on what I can change, the impact I can have, and along with what you were just talking about, knowing me perhaps how to delegate things so other people can do the things that I don't need to do. I should be doing the things that I do the best because we don't do everything perfectly, and we're not an expert in everything. So
Exactly.
learning that there's somebody else who can maybe enter information into um, my computer, or somebody else who can follow up with certain things, but let me focus on what I do best. And that's a balancing act. I'm not saying I've perfected it, but that's what my goal is, to know what I can do, focus on that, and the things maybe that other people can help me with, let them do that so it frees me up.
Nice. And it gives them work.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's been my big lesson this past year is even if it's stuff that I like to do, but if it's not towards my main contribution to the world or it's not income generating, hire someone else to do it. So I've really enjoyed that, working on that as well this past year.
And that's wonderful that you do that, Christina, because so often we get caught up in, we procrastinate and we focus on a task that doesn't take as much brain power. And so we get stuck doing that and maybe fixing PowerPoint slides for an hour. And that's not the best place we should spend our time. But it's an easier thing to do than some of the tougher ones.
Yeah.
So we have to think about that.
Oh, yeah. So, are there any other habits that you've developed to help you do all that you do?
Any other habits? Well, yes, to take time out for myself so that I'm not resenting possibly that I'm spending all this time and not having time with my family, with my interests and things like that. So I think I've done better when I set out times of my day where I'm doing something special that may not be related and may not even be income producing. It may be costing me, but in the long run, it's letting me have more balance to my life. And
Nice.
then I'm more productive when I have to do the other things or want to do the other things. And I
Nice.
think that's been the past year or two where I said I need to just section out times because when we have our own businesses, we can work 24/7. And so if I know that just as much as I'm scheduling my work, I should schedule some play.
Ooh, I like that. Actually, put it in the calendar.
Absolutely. Even if I don't get
Nice.
there, even if I don't get there, it's intentional and I know what I'm not doing. I'm choosing to do work and not do a yoga class or whatever it might be.
There you go. Is there anything else, any other habits you want to share with the listeners?
I think those are the biggest habits. And I think we just have to look, two things I think about is we have to look at ourselves and maybe how other people see us and what we're projecting. And that's where I talk about the 3 V's. But if you flip that, to be a really good communicator, I have this approach I call the Olay approach. You need to observe people, you need to listen to them, and that will allow you to engage. So it's not always about what am I sending out to everybody so that I look professional. I'll also look professional if I show other people that I'm engaging with them and I'm a good listener. And I think that is just as important as the information you send out, that people know that you're listening to them.
Oh, I like that. Observe, listen, engage.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine, ole.
That's it. And then we have a song that goes to it.
Yes. Oh, that's awesome. Was that your final piece of advice?
I think that would be my final piece. Just think about the message you send out and observe the messages other people are sending to you. And if you're doing both, then that's what communication is. And our goal, I think all of us have the goal to be optimal communicators.
Oh, those are great words of wisdom. I love how that especially fits into the self-awareness piece that I like to focus on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So perfect. Wow. Thank you so much for joining us today, Lynda.
My pleasure. It was great talking to you, Christina.
If you'd like to learn more about Lynda, visit her website at successfully-speaking.com.
Did you know that time is not your most limiting resource? To find out how to increase your productivity and have more time to do the things you love, go to me2productivity.com. That's me2productivity.com.